Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with our community development meeting. Today's date is June 12, 2025. The time is 10 a.m. In attendance are Commissioners Eberline, Duncan, and Matari.
Mike Hill.
I'm going to call this meeting to order. There's no chairman's opening remarks today. Are there any changes to the agenda? Hearing none. Poll for conflicts of interest. Do we have any conflicts up here? Nope, no conflicts. This is a continuation of our May 8, 2025 public hearing for ZON 24-0007 Elder Road East, and it's an action item. I have Vlad Finkel, but I'm hoping that community development can just give us an update of what's happened since May 8th when we were holding the public hearing.
Sure. Ben Tarbutton, for the record, Community Development. From the continuation of the May 8th hearing, we've had an opportunity to receive additional information from the applicant. The applicant has provided a conditional zoning development agreement. Staff has had the opportunity, both on a legal standpoint and from a planning standpoint, of the review of the development agreement. I trust that you are familiar with the conditional zoning development agreement as proposed by the applicant. Just as maybe kind of a brief synopsis and some maybe a little bit of history too. As you're aware, both sites here, as you see on the screen, have conditional use permits, which have a very defined and limited commercial use for them, being the RV park on the west and the boat storage facility on the east. What the applicant is requesting through the CZDA is a much broader scope of commercial uses, and in our review of the CZDA, there is some limitations or some reduction in the commercial uses, but in our opinion, it is not significant. There are only a few uses that are excluded that would traditionally be allowed within the commercial zone. So what the applicant is proposing from the broad or the limited scope in a conditional use permit is a much broader scope from that CZDA, but only allows just a little bit more uses if it were just straight commercial zone. In our review, what is intended through a conditional zoning development agreement is, and I can actually read that section of the code for you. It says here in 84901 that the conditional zoning development agreements allow a specific project with a specific use to be developed. In this case, again, staff believes that the proposed conditional zoning development agreement is too broad in scope for staff to support, consistent with our initial recommendation and with the HE recommendation. So that is kind of a brief introduction. If you have any questions, we'd certainly be helpful to ask.
Questions? Did you see the CZDA? I did not see the...
So we didn't get the CZDA. It's not in our...
Electronic file folder?
No. Unless it's hidden in one of the previous...
Was it a separate document provided to us, or was it...
Should be. Well, in the course of the hearing, we'll find it, and I'll drag it into the file folder.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me pull that up here.
Maybe sooner than later.
Yeah. So I just want to try to clarify here that, we have the commercial zoning, which was the original application, which has a very broad range of land uses. The CDZA allows for a specific narrow land use.
A use.
A use, and the request is somewhere closer to a commercial
That's fair.
rezone that has many uses, but not all the uses that go with a commercial zone.
That's a correct synopsis.
Okay.
So here on the screen is the proposed CZDA with the proposed uses. You can see, again, there are in the bullet list here a list of those uses. I also just put together kind of a comparison so that you can kind of see what is being proposed with this CZDA in comparison to what is allowed just generally in the commercial zone. And sorry if you bear with me here just one moment. So everything highlighted here in red is what is proposed in the CZDA. So this is, sorry to back up just for a moment, this is an excerpt from our code. And this is all the uses that highlighted that are in red are pulled from the proposed CZDA. So in the CZDA, they're allowing any wholesale, retail, or service business, public or private office buildings, and so on. What they're excluding is the hospitality businesses, such as these listed, universities, colleges, and other kind of trade schools, utility complexes and utility services, public safety wireless communication facilities, public safety, public service facilities, and helipads. Everything else is allowed. The only, I guess, provision that they are adding on to it is, go back to that, is that within the proposed CZDA, they are putting a 5% limitation on the structure footprint, that of the underlying zoning, the underlying parcel. Using, again, for the westerly property, which is 33 acres, that equates to about 73,000 square feet. If we use the easterly property, which is 27 acres, that's roughly 59,000 square feet of building footprint. So again, staff's opinion, that doesn't appear to be much of a limitation. So.
Any questions? Comments?
No, just that I think that, I want to hear from your ideas, but maybe we take public comment first and then.
Why don't we do that? We'll start with people who are for this. Stephanie Brand, in favor, may wish to speak.
If I might,
You need to
Yes.
push that in, yes.
There you go.
Commissioners, thank you. Ray Kimball, for the record, I am representing the applicant here tonight, or this morning, not tonight. And so I'd like to point out a couple of things. Ben, if you wouldn't mind bringing up the CZDA. There's some clarifying things here. And let's see. And if you go back to the uses that we scroll through, there we go. So there was a significant amount of self-editing. So what we had, the takeaway from our public hearing a month ago, at least from our standpoint, was that the goal here was to edit away the more obnoxious, if you will, commercial uses, things that would not fit in that location, but still allow the property owner the freedom and the ability to utilize their property in a commercial sense. Recognizing that the application standing on its own met every criteria, every legal criteria in the county code for a zone change, as well as state code. We went and looked at, so the 5% gross land area thing, that was a very intentional look or number. And the reason for that is that let's just say that I'm just going to grab a use, say a veterinary office wanted to relocate or open a business in that location. And my client was able to subdivide and carve off an 1.5 acres for a veterinary clinic. So about the right size for a small commercial use in that location alongside Elder Road, let's say. Now, that would allow for roughly about a 4,000 square foot building footprint, which is about what you would expect for a veterinary clinic. Allows for the parking, enough parking, landscaping, buffering, all the stuff that you would need for that, and still leaves 95% of the parcel free of building. And that's a significant thing. It's not, I understand that when you have a 30-acre parcel, 5% sounds, you know, when you do the math, and it's 70,000 acres or 70,000 square feet of retail space or something like that. That's not the point. The point is that, and if the commissioners felt like there's a top limitation to like maybe 15,000 square feet would be the maximum building size on a parcel, that's fine. That's not the point here. The point of that was to ensure that there's a significant amount of the property that is left free from structures for those particular uses, so that you don't end up with a Costco or a Walmart. Not to say that that would be an area that would support one of those things, but it's not appropriate. And that's the self-editing part that we thought was important. If you scroll down, I will point out that with regards to the residential uses, we cut out every residential use except single-family use, and our request was to cut out those single-family and just use single-family use as allowed by 8.2.03, which is, and it should be 203, not 03, which is the residential code for rural zone. So it's basically 5 or 10 acre tracts, and on the reservation it'd be a 10-acre lot. So it's essentially leaving the residential uses the same. And as we go through and we look at each one of those items, there are many, many things in there that if you were to be driving by as a member of the general public, you could look at that and think, yeah, I can see that there. That would be an appropriate thing to be in that location. Understanding that the application for the zone change to commercial on its own actually meets every single criteria of the code. This edited version, and we're willing to listen to and make some concessions if the commissioners think that there are some things in here that are objectionable. But we think it's a matter of making sure that the any business that might open up in that location survives. And so that would be the plan. I mean, to serve the community with commercial uses that will fit the location and survive. That'll benefit the community as a whole. I would remind you that it has overwhelming support of the public. Over 90% of the people who responded in favor. And we feel that the CZDA is a tool to use to edit the objectionable parts, things that might be objectionable, and but still allow the owner to utilize their property its highest and best use to benefit the community.
Thank you. Typically, this is public testimony, so there's limitations, but because you're the applicant's representative, you got a little bit longer. I will at least, I'd like to entertain if any of the other board members have questions or comments. Please, feel free.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not right now.
Not right now, okay. So next up would be Stephanie Brand in favor, may wish to speak. Okay. Anybody on the telephone who is in favor and would like to speak? Going once? Going twice? Okay. Now we will ask for people who are opposed. Jillian Harmon, opposed, wishes to speak. You can go up to the microphone, just make sure, I think it's on,
Yeah.
and just, should be a green light up there. Oh, you see a green light? There it is.
Yep. Hello.
You have 3 minutes.
Okay. My name is Jillian Harmon, and I represent the Coeur d'Alene tribe. The tribe appreciates the opportunity to provide comments to the county regarding this application for a zone change from agricultural and rural to commercial. The tribe reiterates its opposition to the application for zone change as noted in prior comments and oral testimony. The tribe has a duty to protect the health, welfare, economic security, and natural resources of the Coeur d'Alene people. This proposed change does not support those important goals. The tribe formally and strongly opposes the application and strongly urges the county to deny it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak opposed to this? Anybody on the telephone, online?
My name is Heather Griffith. I am strongly opposed. I do not wish to speak further.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, my name is Mike Hill. We own property adjacent to this subject property, and I'm also strongly opposed. I've spoke at the last 2 meetings, so I really don't have anything further to add that I haven't already added. Just wanted to voice my opinion on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who is opposed and would like to speak? Okay. Would anyone up here have any thoughts or comments?
Rebuttal by the applicant.
Well, I
We're-
don't know that we want to close public testimony. I think that we might want to
Talk.
give further guidance to the staff and the applicant. So,
The way that this is being presented to the board, as I see it, as it is normally people approach the board to say, this is what I want to do with a property. In this particular situation, we're being approached with, we want to figure out what we want to do with the property, and we want you to give us very wide guardrails to figure out what we can do with our property. In this particular situation, it's different because a little over a year ago, the board was presented with a conditional use permit application for very specific uses. A boat storage facility and a camping facility for some RVs, as well as glamour camping and some other things. That conditional use permit was approved, and then it turned out afterwards that it didn't offer enough flexibility. For example, with the boat storage facility, you couldn't winterize because it wasn't listed in the conditional use permit. So here we are, fast forward, and now we're being asked to change the zoning of the property to commercial, which allows broad uses. So the first question that has to be answered is, does the board want to change zoning and let people figure it out? Or do we want applicants to provide us with guidance as to what they plan on doing, and then we approve that? And depending on the location determines, I think, the direction that we should be looking at these particular issues. In this particular issue, because it's rural and because the board had already approved specific use, I would be more inclined to go to the CZDA and say to the applicant, tell us what you want to do. You told us what you wanted to do a year ago. If you had entered into this business a year ago, you would be doing it. What has changed to say that this business doesn't work outside of the fact that you can't winterize the boats, which I'm perfectly fine finding a way to winterize boats for a boat storage facility. But it's too big of an ask right now to just make this change. And that's why I think we should go back to community development, give the applicant some narrower guardrails to say, tell us what you want to do, and let's take your original business idea and let's figure out how to make it work within the confines of a CZDA. And that's kind of where my head is with this before we close the public hearing and go into deliberations.
Right. So I'm in agreement as far as I'm not sure that this is necessarily the correct path to just do a flat out zone change, partly because of the comp plan. So I would like to see a little bit more sideboards on it. I actually thought that we were going to go back and look at the CUP and, you know, maybe make some adjustments to the two CUPs that we've already approved. And I don't mind looking at a CZDA, but this really isn't a CZDA that, you know, fits within the confines of the regulations. So yeah, I would really still like staff and the applicant to work together to find out, you know, specifics on this and not just leave it open-ended. I see, you know, I want to do as much as I can to have people be able to use their property. And we had testimony from the applicant, you know, love to have a restaurant. All right, well, what can we look at the RV park CUP to add that additional restaurant, right? So I think there's ways to do what the applicant wants to do, but I just think that we need to have the applicant and the staff speak more together to come a little bit closer.
To what they want to do.
Correct. Yeah.
Commissioner Underline?
My first thought, when we were talking about what's could be there, we're talking about a veterinarian clinic. Okay, so is it going to be cats, dogs, or is it going to be horses and cows and all sorts of stuff? So there's a big difference between a little pootie tat and a cow. I think we need to put things in closer to what we're going to actually use. And it's a very broad statement that's being put out. I'm not necessarily a fan of planning every detail out, but in this case, we don't have much of a choice because there's a whole bunch of people out there that got different ideas, and we're supposed to find some middle ground to where everybody can work together. That's my thought.
Yeah. Well, and again, the conditional use permit, as recently as a year ago. Well, the conditional use permit was for a boat storage facility on one and a campground on the other. And it was very clear.
And I'm not against any of those things.
No, and it was approved. But here, it's basically, I get the sense where that is being scrapped, and it's now saying we want all this leeway to figure out what we want to do. And so then it comes down to the question of, do we change zoning for land so that people can figure out what they want, or do we kind of require, tell us what you want to do, and then we can figure out how to accommodate that. And the way it's being presented this right now is give us everything or as much as we can and we'll figure it out, versus coming to us, which was done a year ago, and saying this is what I want to do, and it was approved.
Yeah, and on these things, you know, it's first in, first out.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
I have a legal question for Pat. If we, it sounds like we have an agreement, we'd like the staff to work with the applicant to further narrow the CZDA, or come back with changes to the CUPs. And I don't know if 2 weeks is going to be enough. We could do it the first meeting in July if we wanted to. I think it would be the 10th. But public hearing wise, if we keep working on the CZDA, is that fit so we don't have to do this all over again? Can we just keep continuing it and keep bringing up the different aspects?
You might want to consider continuing it to a date uncertain if we don't know the time frame for the department and the applicant to negotiate the particulars of the CZDA. Excuse me, that would make the continued hearing subject to the 28-day notice requirement, where continuance to a date certain would not.
Okay.
And just to let the board know, on July 12th, I am available for 10 o'clock, but not for 6 o'clock.
Okay. So,
So, just if we make it a date uncertain, that would trigger notice again of the
Yes.
public hearing?
Yes.
Okay. But it would give more flexibility. So I guess the question is, what would be more ideal?
We would be okay with a July 12th. I think we can hammer
July
something
10th.
out, or 10th. I think we can hammer something out between now and then.
Roughly a month?
yeah.
Yeah, and I do think that, I mean, there's a lot of room for us to pare things down. You know, this was, I think, we would love to hear, I hear what you're saying when it comes to you want to know some specific uses. With regards to changing the conditional use permits, unfortunately, I think there are some legal issues with that because the conditional uses are very, very specific within those zones. And so expanding a conditional use permit to include a use that is not allowed as a conditional use under the existing zones is problematic. So I think the CZDA is the right method to get to the finish line, if you will. And with regards to making sure that we have a good progress, if you will, with staff to make sure that we understand where the commissioners are going with this. I want to just kind of reiterate a couple things so I understand, and maybe you can confirm yes or no. So an eating or drinking establishment would be something that would be all right in that location. Is that something that, so a restaurant of a certain size?
Well, I think staff would have to weigh in because you're still dealing with the fact that you don't have septic or sewer, right? You'd have to go on septic. You wouldn't be able to use sewer. There's the infrastructure.
So all of those things would be conditions on building permit that would be completely 100% on the applicant to ensure that whatever is necessary is provided at those points in time.
I think what the applicant is looking for is, give me the best ideas where we could make something happen and not create everybody within turmoil, and just, to where it's feasible.
Well, I was actually kind of hoping that if you want to have an eating establishment, define it. Define what you want. Tell us what you want, and then we can look at it, okay? Because that is the challenge. You kind of want it to be an open door for whatever you want, which may be it could be a food truck,
Right.
or it could be a full-blown restaurant, right? And the two are very different. I know there's a food truck that is one of the most popular food trucks on the other side of the lake, and people go from all over the place to go there, right?
Right.
So, just tell us what you want, and then we can look at something. And there was a good enough idea a year ago. I mean, the applicant in the last, date on this public hearing said, I couldn't winterize the boats. I don't see that being a problem. If that's what it's going to take to get the boat storage facility, put that there. On the RV park, they said I couldn't even put a coffee stand in there so people could show up in the morning and get a donut and a coffee. Well, if that's what you want, put it in there. But if it's going to be, again, from here to here, it's going to be another more questions, and it's going to be harder, I think, for people to make a decision in favor of the applicant.
Okay.
So just tell us what you want. Yes.
To clarify, David Callahan, Community Development. Since the code expressly says the CZDA is for a specific use and a specific project, I hear you loud and clear in what you just said, but I don't want to play a getting warmer project. Are we on the same page, if you'll pardon the metaphor, that we should come back with something that's narrow in scope with a use or the expansion that you just described or something like that?
Well, that's what a CZDA is.
Yes, sir.
It's another tool set for the board to use to help accommodate an applicant for a business type endeavor. And so that's in essence why I think we're discussing this. And for the sake of expediency, for saving the client money, I think that if we just put this off to date certain and the applicant comes to us and says, this is what I want to do that fits within the confines of a CZDA, I think it'll be much easier to make a decision, because at some point we need to make a decision. And I think the board is trying to find a way to accommodate the applicant this way. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, because we're not satisfying the people in the county in the bureaucrats. We're the ones that we're supposed to help everybody else.
Mm-hmm. So with that said, I don't believe there's any other testimony at this point today. So I will take a motion to continue this public hearing to July 10th,
Yes, 10 a.m.
10 a.m.
Okay, so I move that we continue the public hearing for both ZON 24-007 and 008 Elder Road.
I don't know if we can do that because I have more public comment on the other.
Oh, I thought you were doing it all at once.
I hadn't. Do you want me to go ahead and we can just go right into that and do a single motion? I just want to make sure we don't end it without having everyone else speak.
So we're continuing it to July 10th is the continuation of the hearing?
Yeah, but I have this public comment that I did not call upon. 'cause
Okay,
it
so
was a
you
separate,
did her, you called her already. He already spoke.
You know, let's see, they're listed for different.
Correct, yeah,
Okay.
but we've combined it.
Okay.
So, and then she already spoke.
Okay, well, if we're good with that.
Since they've already spoken, I think we can go ahead and do the motion and you can combine, do the motion for both matters.
That's fine. That's fine. So sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I'll start over. So I move that we continue the public hearing to July 10th at 10 a.m. for ZON 24-007 and ZON 24-008.
So be it.
Commissioner Eberline,
Aye.
Commissioner Duncan,
Aye.
Chair Matari.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, next up is a business item. It's item 3, permit fees paid upfront. It's an action item, and Director David Callahan.
Thank you, Commissioners. At the moment, or at the current state of affairs, we get portions of permit fees up front, and then we collect the remaining portion later in the process. That is problematic. For instance, it's not uncommon for us to do plan review for a building permit where we haven't actually collected the fee yet. Then we do the plan review, and then the applicant backs out, and then they don't want to pay us. That results in many thousands of dollars of fees we haven't been collecting. So one of the ideas we'd like to share with you today, and Craig will drill down the details, is we'd like to start getting more of that captured up front, if you will, so we're not leaving money on the table. And so that we don't have to play a collection game after we've already spent staff time reviewing these things. That's the essence of it. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Craig Davidson for some details to fill in the gaps.
Good morning, Commissioners. Craig Davidson, Community Development. $4,449 and $922 right now is what we have on the table for permits outstanding.
Can you say that number again?
$449,922.
What I thought you said.
I apologize. So with that, typically the planning fees that we consider hard costs are built into that. It's about anywhere from 17 to 22%. So if we use around 20%, roughly right now, we would have about $80,000 more dollars up front in the fees collected. We only collect the $134 application fee at this time. As the director stated, it can be problematic. Obviously, people are not going to walk away from their permits, but we do have cancellations of permits up to the time pre-issuance where staff has already done the work and the reviews. That goes unpaid. The intent is to capture the staff work for payment for services rendered up front. So Ben, if you wouldn't mind, open up the CD fees sample. So what I'd like to do is just illustrate on this some typical hard cost fees that we have. Like, for instance, this one, it's an administrative exception. Okay, it's $110. That's something that we can collect up front. Scroll down to the next one. Extension requests, sketch, site plan visits, pre-application fees, all of those can be up front. Next slide, please. You've got the commercial site plan review fee, $280. I know this doesn't seem like a bunch, but it does add up over time. Next slide, please. There's a residential planning permit review fee, $168. Next slide. Next one. Okay, so this gets a little more substantial. When you can see what's highlighted in yellow, those are fees that are known hard costs for reviews that we should be able to collect up front to cover the staff time in a review process. Next one, please. Again, same types of fees for the reviews, pre-application fee, plan review. As you can see, the dollars do add up. Now, at this time, we have about ready to issue, there's 9 residential permits totaling about $55,000. If we had those permit fees up front, we'd be sitting at $11,000 for the work that's already done. If those 9 applicants walked away from it. Services are committed, we've done the reviews, staff should be paid for those reviews for fiscal responsibility. So that's what we're seeking to be able to do, is gather those fees up front. I did bring the auditor's office in on this because I know they would have concerns for the potential of refunds. Since these are the hard costs, it's not so much. Now, if we did it post-issuance fees, such as fire district impact fees and things like that, that could be really problematic for them. And our goal is not to encumber, obviously, any other department here. We want their support. Since I've been in this job, I've done 2 refunds since October of last year. Pretty decent. And it's been on the planning side, but most of their fees are captured up front. But we're typically leaving quite a bit on the table.
Anything else?
Commissioners, the one other thing I can add is that when we check around with other jurisdictions in our area, the cities and Spokane, they are all already collecting everything you just saw in yellow up front. So we would be in line with what other jurisdictions around here are doing.
Rathdrum is the only jurisdiction not collecting fees up front.
Did you talk to them and ask them how that's working out? Are they having the same issues that are your department is
I'm
having?
not certain.
Okay. Questions, thoughts?
Well, for me, if I was gonna go build something, I'd probably do a preliminary walk down to the community development and say, okay, so what can I do? What it's gonna take, so on and so forth. But there's gonna be all sorts of questions, and it depends on the difficulty and problems that are sitting there. So you could get down to the road a long ways, halfway down the project, and all of a sudden it's not feasible. So how do you make it to where the people that are looking for the service and that we're supposed to be providing a service, how do we make it to where it can be good for each party? Because if you're spending a lot of money out there on something that's not going to happen, you just wasted a lot of time and a lot of staff time.
Well, in that, Commissioner, that's a great point, because
Yeah.
having been in the construction industry, you know, if you enter into a contract with somebody, you probably cover your expenses up front for at least some materials.
Of course we do.
Absolutely, and that's what I'm proposing here that we do with the building permit, hard costs up front for the staff review. Because what happens, that, now this is up to issuance. On the other side, when it's been issued, that's when changes occur and things like that, and they're feed accordingly. Those are soft costs that we don't want to try to bring into this side of it because of the complications it could present for like the auditor's office and staff in general.
So it just needs to be, it needs to be equal.
Pardon?
It needs to be equalized.
Right.
And, because there is a solution, because if I take this phone and I decide I'm gonna buy it,
Right.
and then I throw it on the floor and stomp on it, nobody's gonna do that.
Right. My goal is to maintain fiscal stewardship for services rendered up front.
Yes.
Commissioner Duncan?
The only thing that I would ask, is there a way to keep a case? So let's say in Commissioner Eberlein's example, so you get all the way up there, you've paid your review, and then you decide, okay, we can't do it right now. Is there a way to capture those so then, okay, next year I come back and I say, okay, now I'm ready to go ahead and I've already been through this much of the process. Do I have to start completely over, or can we use what's already been done to move forward? And yeah, there might be an extension fee or something, for that, but would we be able to capture that?
There is room for that sort of thing up to the point where the state changes
Sure.
the code, and then we're in a new code cycle, and we really have to charge new fees.
Yeah, and that's nobody's fault. I mean,
And the issue with that is the permit upon issuance, it's good for 180 days with extensions after that. It's up to the time of issuance. If the reviews are done, they say, well, put it on hold for that 180 days, that's fine. Then at a certain time period, it'd be considered an abandoned application, or they'll cancel or what have you. But
okay.
we do allow for extensions. But again, as the director said, a new code cycle, everything has to be
Right.
canceled.
Looked at again, so.
It sounds like, because I hear both sides here, and they both make sense. Expectations management, right? So someone comes in, they go, hey, I'd like to try to do this. Then you're halfway through the process, and it just looks like it's not feasible, but you spent all this money to find out you can't do something, right? And on the other side, sometimes you have to stop your project, for whatever reason. And you don't want to feel like you've lost everything that you've put into it, and you got to start over because something came up that led to a pause. I wonder if there's not some way to charge as we go. And because and with good expectation management, like for example, on a flat lot, someone wants to build a house, a slab house or something, there's water there, it's not a problem. It's probably going to be pretty easy that the expectation is it's going to go through. But if it's on a steep slope, like around a lake or something, you're going to need retaining walls and pylons and all kinds of stuff. It just, that adds to the complexity. They may not find out how difficult it is until they've really, engaged in the process. Is there a way that we can kind of have a step-by-step that just says, you can prepay everything up front, which will expedite the process, or we'll complete a step, talk with you. If we go yes to the next step, we pay for that, we'll go one more step further. And then that way, instead of being too far into the process, there's communication every step of the way. Because I don't think we want to be in a situation where, and I'm understanding better now why we've ended up always coming up short with community development, because they paid a little up front, we did a lot on the back end, and then they said no, and that money has to be supported by the taxpayers. And that's what we want to try to avoid.
To answer your question, I'm not sure. I need to talk to the chief billing official
Yeah.
and see if we could incrementally bill differently than we have. I would think so, but I think it's also fair to say that what you just described happens rarely. Most people know up front when they're ready to pull the trigger on a project.
And the reason, these reviews are done with that, within that scope, as is. And so we always have the capability to refund. I really believe, 6 years, I haven't seen that many of them, even if we change our business practice this way. I would say it'd be a very slim percentage that we would wind up refunding. There's always the anomalies that are out there, but as business practices go, and David, you could probably speak better to it tonight.
No, I think that's spot on. I've been here 11 and a half years. I think I've written one refund.
Okay.
So,
I can draw a parallel to our last conundrum with, was it a cow? We're gonna put a veterinary clinic in or whatever. Same thing, same exact issue, trying to find some way to use something.
well, and then
Make
we're
it
trying
work.
to be customer friendly too, because
Yes.
we don't wanna have them write several different checks for several different parts of the process or pay that way, so.
And they keep coming back and trying to find a way,
Right, right.
which everybody does.
Sure. And so, like I say, the upfront costs are pretty standard for the reviews. And it's known, it's when post issuance, that's where things change quite a bit for successive reviews, changes in plans, and those are identified at that point in time, and they're dealt with accordingly to a whole different set of rules. And that's where we have to be very, very discretionary.
Well, I think if the expectations are set properly in the beginning, you'll have less people at least walking away kind of feeling like, I wasted my money. I didn't get what I wanted and I spent all this money. If it's going to be a complex project, they need to know you're probably going to be in this a certain amount of money before we really even know if it's feasible.
Sure.
And for the easy ones, there probably won't be any problem. It'll glide right through.
So it sounds like you're tentatively okay with the concept, but we need to talk with our staff and come back with you about iterative ways to bill.
I'm fine with you going on
Okay.
and working it out amongst yourselves, how it works out. And obviously, if you have a question, Pat would be able to help you, but I'm fine. I mean, we can't have a subsidy situation, but I'm also very sensitive to the fact that our community has required us to have building permits. We required this. So it's like, I may not be in favor of it, and now you're requiring me to spend money to go do this. So I want to be sensitive there where we're not like nickel and diming every, I just picked up the phone and answered a 30-second question. I'm charging you 15 minutes, right? I don't want to get into a lawyer billing, no offense, Pat, situation. So I'm really sensitive to that. But again, I understand too that, we've had permits on our property and I need to pay for your time to get through the process, whether I agree with it or not. That's a whole issue. So, I'm fine. I don't need to hear this again. Do you?
I just assume, I agree, we should not have it subsidized by the taxpayers. So we just have to figure out how to make it work from an expectation management in the beginning, so that some people recognize that in order to determine if this project is feasible, it's going to cost you some money, and it may be money that you don't ever recover because the project just doesn't complete.
You paid for knowledge.
Yeah, you paid for knowledge.
That helps. We can take it from there. Thank you.
Commissioner Eberline, anything else you want to add?
Not much to add.
Okay, all right, that is item 3. Next up is item 4, SDP Shoreline Violations Fee Increase. It's an action item, and Director David Callahan.
Commissioners, before I launch into the details, I want to thank Jamie Broomer and Rebecca Stevens, who are behind me. Rebecca from the tribe and Jamie from DEQ, because I had mentioned to them that what we're about to discuss is an issue that they have concerns with, and they understand lake water quality, frankly, better than I ever will. And so I thought it might be useful for them to be here in case you have questions along those lines. But the essence of what I wanted to discuss today, and Ben, if you could pull up the examples that we can use to speak from. For many years, we've had issues where people denude the front property adjacent to the shoreline. We call that shoreline management area. It's a term of art written into the land use code. And that's just one example if you just sort of skim through them while I'm discussing it. You can see how in this case it went from vegetation to rock. And in the next case, vegetation, then the trees are removed here. But there's also an enormous retaining wall that's, we'll see it there with ELA's sign on it. It's, I think if I remember right, this was actually too close to the,
I think that wall is fine.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
We have another example where
Yeah,
it's,
if you keep going through, there's another example.
so the long and short of it is these are just typical examples of where people pull out the vegetation. This is another case where once the vegetation is gone, it's hard to unchisel stone, especially when the trees are 20, 30, 40, 100 years old. And there are multiple reasons why this creates water impact or water quality impacts. But go ahead. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I just going through this. This is one where we put the owner on notice that we will litigate this if they don't get this, if they don't at least start getting this fixed by later this month. That's how egregious this one is.
So part of the issue here is that the fines that we have are inconsequential. And maybe fines are the wrong way to even go about it. In hindsight, I would not have listed fee increase. I would just put discussion of fees. Because if you look at what Pat just brought up and you think about, we've done a notice of violation, and if they fixed everything properly and paid the fee, it would be $400 or $500 at most, $350, $400 for the fee for all the damage that occurred there. Sort of set that in the back of your mind. I toyed with the idea of could we impose the $1,000 a day fine up to $20,000 that you as a board, prior to Commissioner Eberline coming back on the board, it created this ability for me to levy a $1,000 a day fine up to $20,000 for egregious cases. But in that case, I promised I would come back to the board before I pulled the trigger. And the other weirdness of the code is that it has to be for something we've already done a notice of violation on. It has to be a recorded issue. So we don't have the immediacy that I think is necessary for these kinds of issues where people are creating significant damage. It's hard to fix it. In some cases, in this case, you need to pull out about $40,000 or more worth of construction work. And just doing that creates its own disturbance and lake water quality issues. So it's a bit of a conundrum, if you will.
What percentage is based on ignorance? Like, this is my house and I'm just making it beautiful the way I want it, and I just really have no idea
Greg
that there's
can
that
speak to that.
25-foot buffer.
I'll put my code compliance hat back on. This year, and I just looked it up because I figured you'd want to know, there's 65 cases of shoreline issues or site disturbance issues in the county right now, as of today, and dealing with things like this. Probably about half or better, if it's a homeowner issue, is out of what you say is ignorance. Which we have a wonderful committee, it's called the SEEP Committee, that is, it's a great resource that we could, it's an educational program, and I'm not gonna take anything away from Jamie, but we could require that in our site disturbance ordinance that contractors and such be SEEP certified. It's good for 3 years, which would probably eliminate, I'd say, at least a quarter of this right up front.
So what you're saying is that as a homeowner, you hire, you meet a contractor and you say, hey, I want to put this wall here and take that tree down. And contractor says, yeah, I can do that for you, no problem. And that contractor knows that they need to get a permit for this. The homeowner doesn't, and the contractor engages in this work and kind of takes advantage of the ignorance in the literal definition of the homeowner.
Yes,
Correct.
that's fair.
And generally, we've tried to close that gap for educational purposes, because we get the homeowner involved, and now code compliance will call them to let them know. They said, my contractor told me everything was fine. And so our concern is for that homeowner. But yet, if we don't mandate a bit of a higher standard, then where do we go with it? Obviously, in cases like this, remediation is key, and we hold them accountable for that. But again, with the way the ordinance is written for the $1,000 a day fee, I would almost propose we come back to you with a set fee schedule, certain violations that are egregious in nature, is a stepped or tiered approach on those offenses.
And our code enforcement regulations already allow for that.
Commissioner Eberline, you got any thoughts on this? I have some I'd like to share, but I just want to ask you first.
Go for it.
So, we talked a little bit, and first of all, the question is, what do we want to solve? Do we want to generate fees for the county, or do we want the homeowner to put their property into the, between the guardrails of what we expect in this community? And I would argue what we really are trying to do is cure the violation, not try to generate fees. And so I would like to find a way where we can incent the homeowner to cure the violation and not find a way to just generate fees. So, and it seems like most of these are curable, except for the fact when you cut trees down, because you can't put them back on, things like that. Go ahead, Director
Pardon me,
Cohen.
Chair Matari, I forgot to mention earlier, we do have some few contractors and builders that buy the property, know full well what they're doing, do this sort of thing, and then ask for forgiveness, and then work the itty-bitty cost into passing it on to this buyer.
Yeah.
That much is galling.
Yeah.
It goes back to your point of it'd be nice to get people to do the right thing up front.
Well, but the thing is that, what do we have, a $20,000 fine tool for a multi-million-dollar waterfront property? That becomes the cost of doing business.
Right.
But that's not what our goal is, I think. If the
Right.
board says our goal is to have, people cure these violations, then we should be focusing on that as opposed to focusing on the fines.
One possible approach I think we could do is, if at some point, David imposes the fine but holds it, suspends it or holds it in abeyance in, for a certain, giving them a certain period of time to cure the violations. If they do, they don't have to pay. If they don't, then the fine, then it.
Well, I'm wondering, is there something that can be attached to the title that notifies a prospective buyer that they're buying a property that is that's in violation?
Well,
That is the
code violations.
Okay, so that goes in there, all right,
Yeah.
okay,
That is the notice of violation.
okay.
But Pat, one of the things that confuses me under our current writing, it says the director may impose a civil penalty for a recorded violation. I assume that means a NOV. Is that fair? That's 88603B.
Yeah, and I've got it right here.
Okay.
And, yeah, it does say recorded violation. Of course, I don't think that stops us from saying, this is the initial NOV. You have 45 days to cure, 28 days to appeal. If you don't cure within 45 days, this will be the fine upon recordation of this notice.
Got it.
Could say that. I think
That
would
much we
be
could
fine.
do. Okay. Thank you.
And Commissioner Matari, you're exactly correct. We're not in the business for this specifically to collect the fees. It's just we want to drive the right behavior behind that. And actually, with what Jamie could tell you and anybody else, it's for the protection of the property, the preservation of the water, the fish habitat, and those kinds of things that these issues create
Yeah,
catastrophic effects.
well, what I don't, yeah,
That is a cost in itself for shoreline remediation. And it, as David said, it can be very costly, and that's where we need to hold accountability and protection and preservation of
Yeah.
our natural resources.
well, what I don't want is community development to come to us with a grant for a boat so they can troll for fines and fine violations. That's the last thing that I'd like to see. So,
Usually use
Maybe we
DEQ's
could
boats for that.
put 'em the back of the boat and pedal.
Yeah, we
there you
parked
go.
some waterways before too.
Right.
yeah,
Not to control for violations, just to look at ones that are already.
Yeah.
Right.
but,
Sometimes there's stuff that looks ugly, but it might not necessarily be ugly.
Sure.
yeah.
I saw a couple of those and I thought, what was the problem with that?
I think the converse can be true though too.
Yeah. So,
I have just a question or a thought, and I'm not sure if this is the right question to ask the board in its entirety. There may be other people that need to be involved in this, and it's probably a pretty sticky question. But you mentioned kind of like incentives. How can we incentivize a property owner to, do the right thing or to, maintain what we value as far as the quality of the lakes? Is there any possibility to incentivize them through maybe a tax type relief? Like if they maintain their waterfront in a native vegetation or a natural standpoint, they receive some kind of tax benefit for it.
well, that's like saying we're going to incent you to undo the bad behavior that you chose to do on your own. Yeah, and that's, yeah. We might end up just having this before us again as a final. But it seems to me that the penalty is the cure. That's the way, that's how it should be. If there's a penalty, it shouldn't be a fine from the county, it should be the cure. And the cure, in essence, is, if you're doing it the wrong way, you got to do it the right way. And otherwise, it becomes a blemish on your property when you try to sell it, right? Because a buyer is now buying a property with a code violation on it, right? So they recognize that there's a problem there. And they could be subject, I guess, to,
Yes.
They buy into it, literally.
they're buying into that problem. So I think it's a matter of, do we want to collect fees or do we want to have the property set up the way that it's, the system lays it out? But to give an incentive after the fact, to me, seems, if that's what you're saying.
And I don't think state law will allow for that anyway.
There you go.
What was that, Pat?
Giving tax incentives to people,
Who cure their violation.
yeah,
Or not just necessarily cure violations.
or just
but
maintain it in compliance with our regulations.
Because then who's going to go out and inspect? Who's going to do all these things? More fees.
It was probably a bad idea. I was just.
No, but it was an idea, and that's always worth poking at a little bit, examining.
Hey, would you humor me and go through some of those slides again?
Get out of your way.
Start from the top.
Yeah.
So
There's some that are more egregious than others.
2017, kind of got this area, becomes this in 2022.
So that was a little road going down to,
It's a walkway, and it's all gravel instead of vegetation.
how,
That's a property on Hayden Lake.
is that, what's wrong with it? Is it causing harm?
If I might add, for the record, Garrett Kenny, Community Development. I think a lot of what you'll find with these violations is when you remove the natural vegetation from that shoreline management area, that 25-foot buffer, it really takes away from the water quality, water temperature, habitat, things like that. I don't know if there's other people here that might be more versed on speaking to that, but that really is the main challenge here, is that once you get rid of this native vegetation, you're really not going to get it back, even with a remediation plan, which most people do, but it doesn't establish for 10, 20, 30 years mature vegetation that's going to then provide the same effects that the native vegetation did when it previously existed. And I think that is really the issue here, is because I think a lot of us would go through
Well, then
here.
we shouldn't turn any rocks over.
What's that?
Then we shouldn't turn any rocks over, because that's
Not if it's that close to the lake.
Well, and ultimately, what you have when you have a weather event, all that vegetation's taken. If it's just soil exposed, it's a direct wash right into whatever water body it is, depending on the slope. And obviously, you know the effects of that. The Wildcat Creek one that we had happen 2 years ago, well, in 2022, that plume was at least a half mile into the lake. It clogged,
Oh, yes, it
it
does that.
clogged
Those
people's
things
water
do that.
filters for up to a year afterwards. And they depend on that drinking water. And some guys were, when it initially happened, they were changing their filters every day for a month. That's just reported stuff. So it's significant. It is significant.
You know, one of the other things too, I think that just native vegetation does is it prevents erosion. And so
As well
along
as
the
nutrients.
waterfront, we regularly flood. And so as the floodwaters rise, it's gonna be eroding away the stuff that's been removed. So I think that, again, in addition to what Garrett had mentioned, I would add that.
So we don't have any how are you gonna get your boat down to the water? It's gonna make a skid mark down the hill.
I noticed we have a couple of folks, I think, here who may have some thoughts or comments they'd like to add. Is that the case? Would you come on up and just identify yourself and
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Rebecca Stevens with the Shoreline Tribe. Good to see you all again. It's been a long time. Just a couple things. I think first I'd like to take us down a little history lane. In 2008, DEQ and the tribe, Jamie's predecessor and I, did conduct a lake shoreline survey of the development around Coeur d'Alene Lake. As you all know, if you're on the state's or tribe's waters, you can take pictures of the landscape. So it's totally legal to do that. We found that there's quite an interesting phenomenon. When you, in certain bays, I'm not going to start listing anything around the lake, but not thinking Coeur d'Alene most specifically, but if you notice where people keep riparian vegetation, the vegetation along shorelines or streams, when they keep it and maintain it to slow that runoff, to slow nutrients coming off the landscape, their neighbors tend to do the same thing. It's kind of a phenomenon how they follow suit in those types of management practices. And then you'll go into an area where they've hacked down the vegetation because they can't see the lake. And then their neighbor's like, well, I want to do that too. And so it's very interesting. It's an interesting social phenomenon that happens with people that live on the water. If there's a violation, according in Kootenai County, on some shoreline or site disturbance ordinance violation or a concern by a neighbor, they call the county. They say, you know what, my neighbor, they did something. I don't think it's right. Okay, well, can you give me your name and your number and your address, and we'll follow up. How many people do you know are going to rat out their neighbor, except for Mark, rat out their neighbor and with the potential that their neighbor was in violation, and then they get word of that? It doesn't happen. And so there's a lot of this going on. This is a daily thing that we see on our waterways. Under the Idaho Forest Practices Act, stream protection zone is 75 feet. And I don't know if Idaho code trumps county code, but 75 feet is something we've been pushing for, if not 150 feet, for years with the county. We've been working with the comp plan revisions for 20 years. 25 feet is not a protection, especially on a slope. There's science out there. We could kill you with it and break out all the files we've been providing to you over the years, or your predecessors. So I would look at not only your site disturbance ordinance and the distance and what is protective of water quality and nutrients and the heavy metals we have at the bottom of Coeur d'Alene Lake. I would continue to look at that closely, but David's right. Player haters, they're doing this stuff and then they're paying a fine, they're getting away with it. You had the Mother's Day dredger. Does anybody remember the Mother's Day dredger? Pat, I don't know if you were at legal counsel when, okay, well, that was Magnuson. He litigated that for the Spokane River.
What was that?
Oh, some landowner dredged the Spokane River on Mother's Day weekend so they could put in their own little boating thing, access, and that was a violation of federal law, actually, but
Yeah, I remember that, but we didn't litigate that. I think that was a little higher pay grade than us.
Magnuson did that one, yeah. So this is something that we have been concerned about for many, many years. We're killing our lakes. We're loving our lakes to death. And the last protective thing that we have around our shorelines is vegetation to slow runoff, keep those nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus on the landscape. And we support the department. We support you all and just doing what we can to be best stewards of our waterways. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there, yeah, come on up. Just state your name, please, and who you're with.
Good morning. Sorry, I didn't obviously prepare anything for today, but my name is Jamie Bruner. I'm with the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. I'm the Coeur d'Alene Lake Management Supervisor for the state, and I'm also the chair of the SEEP Committee, which is Panhandle Stormwater and Erosion Education Program. So while I don't have anything specific to offer as far as what your solution should be, what we do in SEEP is we preach a lot of prevention and education. I'm a big fan of just giving people information they need to make the right decisions and, in effect, take the right actions on their properties. And I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, but this gentleman here spelled it out really well, that once you remove stuff, you know, you can't regrow a tree, but also like all of the stuff that goes into disturbing a shoreline or any opening up of soil, bare soil is a big problem as far as once it gets moving, it can be a big problem for our waterways. And so I guess I would just offer as a resource the SEEP program. And if we can provide a presentation to this group, or if we can help publicize any messages that you want to get out to the public, we're here to provide whatever services we can offer there. I do know Craig mentioned that some other jurisdictions require SEEP certification as part of the permitting process. I believe the city of Sandpoint still requires SEEP or an equivalent. It doesn't have to be SEEP. We don't, you know, we're a voluntary organization, so we're not going to force anybody to take our class. But if you can somehow get people the education they need before things are undone, that's the best case scenario in my mind. And so just some things to consider. And again, if there's any information I can present for this conversation here, or, you know, getting articles out in the press to educate people on requirements or anything, I'm happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, what are your thoughts on this, Mark?
It's a can of worms.
It is. You know, I'm kind of the opinion that we should focus on, you know, what we want to have done. And in this particular situation, for these properties, we want them cured if they want to make these changes and do it the right way, as opposed to just finding them and making it almost a quasi-business model for the property owner, as well as even perhaps the county. Because I don't like the idea of fining people.
No, it's not a good idea, and that's not what you want to do. You see people doing stuff like this up here with the logs down there, and I know maybe some goat roper that thought that was funny, and there's all sorts of people that do different things. Some of them are good and some of them are bad, and they make it bad for everybody.
Now, what about the contractors, Pat? I mean, these are the people who are supposed to know what to do, the right way to do things, whether they're hired or they buy the properties. What kind of recourse is there with them?
Well, I think Craig can explain it a little better, but what my take on it is that, first of all, the property owner, of course, is ultimately responsible for what goes on the property, even if it's by a contractor. That being said, we do work with contractors to ensure that they, either do the right thing or make it right if they do something wrong. I think on that end, I think education is probably, whether we require SEEP certification or not, I think education is a really good method of trying to get more compliance out of contractors, whether it's going through an IBCA or whatever. I think we should engage in that as well.
So maybe.
As well as the education through enforcement.
So what about like a naughty contractor list that says these people, did not follow code compliance on some projects?
Well, there is an advertisement for that on that retaining wall there.
Yeah. And then you also have.
We could do that. We just have to make damn sure that we have evidence backing it up.
Well, and then the other side to that is, I presume that these contractors deal with the building department on other projects, and so what could be done there? If we have established that they violated on a different project, especially something that's egregious.
There's sleazy people out there.
Yeah.
There was a project when I was commissioner. It's been several years ago now. And this contractor put in a big, tall retaining wall. I don't know, it was 12, 15 feet tall. It fell down.
Yeah.
So they had to rebuild it at the expense of the homeowner, and they did the same thing again.
Yeah.
And there's sleazy people out there that just don't care.
Well, we have issues with other people who were paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to contractors to build homes, and
Yes.
it hasn't happened. And so I'd wonder if that's not another avenue to be looking at.
We would have to do a code amendment to do that, but I think what you're kind of talking about is like a debarment list.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, contractors that wouldn't be able to do business with the county.
And
Yes.
And people that they put a dam around the house and they don't cover it up so they can, it'll shed the water, and people have to pay for it. And they shouldn't have to, but they should have had good workmanship.
And that's a list that a homeowner could examine before actually doing work with a contractor.
Yeah, we could put it on our website and have it available, you know.
What the hall of shame.
Right.
The naughty boy list.
Yeah.
Like I said, that would require a code amendment, but it'd be fairly simple.
Well, and it might even, that might be dangerous too, because we could become liable. Well,
That's why I keep saying we would need a lot of evidence to back it up if it's being on the debarment list, because, yeah, you risk, exposure, defamation, tortious interference with business relations,
Well,
that kind of thing. But if you have the evidence to back it up, then, that's insulating yourself from liability.
I think it's the due process.
Yeah.
That's what it just comes down to is, if we have a good system in place for due process.
Yeah, they could, they could certainly appeal placement of debarment lists just like any other determination.
Well,
and I don't know if that'd be good or not, but the owner of the property is the one who's ultimately under the gun.
And that's the first thing I said.
And how many people are going to do that?
Well, if I could real quick, but the other side is that sometimes the owner of the property is the contractor. And then it's catch me if you can, because then they do it and then they sell it. And at that point, the crime has been committed and it's behind them.
And ultimately, the most important issue here is the preservation and restoration of the shoreline.
Yeah. I would be okay with investigating a code amendment or at least a due process system that made sense. You don't get on this list easily.
Right.
I mean, it's not like we just don't like what we saw and you're on the list, but it's a real taking these pictures, discovering it, going out, talking with people, finding out what's going on.
Yeah, multiple incidents of violation.
Yes, at least 2. And then looking at what can be done for cure methods for the property owners.
That's a start.
And at least not, relying on fines
Right.
as the first tool set, but more like the last tool set.
Well, that helps, thank you.
Anything else? Anything you have?
Not this time.
No? Okay, well, that concludes our meeting. 11:18, meeting adjourned. Thank you.